I know our president is a loud tribesman. Why are we all African?
You don't have to go back very far, only about 100,000 years, and all our ancestors lived in Africa, were African, and walked out of Africa not that long ago. So we are African, actually we're African apes. We're all African apes, and it somehow brings us all together, don't you think?
We're apes with a shave.
Yeah, exactly right, yes.
But Christine O'Donnell, who I showed the clip of last week, said that she does not believe in evolution, believes it's a myth, because she said, how come we don't see apes evolving now? Why don't you go to the zoo and see the monkey evolving, you know, before our eyes? I know this is what they call a softball here in America, but for those who don't... You know.
That is spectacularly stupid and... It's not...
I love the British, the way they can get away with it.
It's not just that it suggests that she thinks that monkeys turn into humans overnight, but
right.
It's also the fact that monkeys are very good doing what they do. They live up trees, and it's a very good thing to be a monkey if you're up a tree. You might as well say, why aren't humans turning into monkeys? Because we have a common ancestor with monkeys, which lived
right.
about 20 million years ago, and we've both been evolving ever since. That's as simple as that.
And what about throwing the poop?
Well, I've known that to happen, if not in real humans, at least in human cartoons.
But that does seem to suggest that the monkeys are more primitive, more interested.
Well, primitive means more like ancestor. So if we looked at the common ancestor of humans and it's up there, and then
right.
we come down. That common ancestor would have looked much more like a monkey than it looks like a human. So we probably would have called it a monkey, yes.
And the people who say evolution, you know, not real because we can't see it, this kind of stuff, in your book, which is marvelous, interesting, even to the layman, which is what I am, the layman, if I could appreciate it, anyone can, because I'm not a science person. You talk about, for example, the fact that lizards, even in our lifetime, were moved to an island, right?
Yeah.
Where they never were before, and we saw it in just a matter of decades.
That's right. I mean, most of evolution happened before we were born and took much too long for us to see, but there are just a few examples, and these lizards is one. They were moved from one island in the Mediterranean to another, and within a couple of decades, they had evolved a completely new diet, and that had changed their jaws, even changed their stomachs, and they now got stomach valves. In just a couple of decades, just think what could be achieved in 1 million years, 100 million years.
So when people say the Bible is real, what they're really saying is that ancient people somehow have more knowledge of it, somehow more wiser. That's silly, right? Because wisdom develops on the shoulders of other people. I mean, there could be no Einstein without Newton. There could be no, right?
Yeah. And we're not even talking about the ancient Greeks, and we're talking about a tribe of wandering Middle Eastern herdsmen. I mean, why would they have any wisdom about the origin of the world or the origin of anything else? That particular myth is the myth that just by sheer chance, the Judeo-Christian myth, happens to have come to our civilization. There are thousands of myths in the world. None of them are any better than any of the others. Some of them are a lot more poetic than that one.
Right.
But that's all you can say.
And you have a campaign, I know that I saw you speak on YouTube very eloquently about this OUT campaign.
Oh, the OUT campaign. Well, it's even written on the
right.
T-shirt, which, by the way, you can get from richarddawkins.net. And you also look up...
You're not so evolved that you're above applause.
I know. Sorry about that. And the OUT campaign is there too. The OUT campaign, it's partly... Sorry about that. And the OUT campaign is there too. The OUT campaign, it's partly come out as an atheist. Don't be afraid to come out. It's not... but we're not in the business of outing people. People may out themselves, and all we do is encourage them. Keep religion out of schools, keep religion out of politics.
I want to hear your answer to the people, because I saw you speak about this, who say, well, you know, atheists are responsible for really all the horrible things that have happened in the last century, because Hitler and Stalin and Mao were all atheists, and look what they did.
Hitler was a Roman Catholic, and even if he wasn't, which he was, even if he wasn't, his soldiers, his foot soldiers, those who actually did the horrible things, were either Catholic or Lutheran, and they had been schooled for centuries to hate Jews. Both Catholics and Lutherans had been trained to believe that Jews were responsible for killing Jesus. So Hitler had a ripe field to plough there in the Christian heritage of Germany.
But could I add something to that? Because I've thought about this, I've been confronted this with myself many times, which is that I think people get hung up on the word religion. Hitlerism, Stalinism, Maoism were state religions.
They were religions, of course.
And Hirohito in Japan was a godlike figure.
Yeah.
The real crux of it is that any time that people give up on logic and put their faith in someone, Kim Jong-il, in North Korea, the mythology around him. They said that the first time he played golf, he had 11 holes in one.
That's right, yes.
That's religion.
That's right. And the point is that there is no logical pathway that would lead you from atheism to do those terrible things.
Right.
There is a logical pathway that would lead to that either from a Christian religion or something like that, or from one of these state religions like Nazism, like Stalinism, and so on. You really can justify doing those awful things if you believe something as strongly as religious people do. But nobody's going to go and kill for the sake of atheism. Why on earth would you?
Right. Yeah. In France this week, they passed a law that you cannot wear the burqa. Now, I know you feel, as I do, it doesn't really matter what you wear, but just speak a little about what goes on in the schools of...
Right. I mean, I think there, as you imply, there are much worse things than the clothes you wear. A couple of months ago, I visited a British Islamic school, one of the best in the country, and the headmaster was a leading Muslim in Britain. And I spoke to about 6 of the girls. Only the girls and boys are kept strictly separate, of course. And I learned that every single pupil in that school did not believe in evolution. And the pupils that I spoke to quite clearly think that the Quran is a superior source of scientific information than evidence. And they told me, for example, that salt water and fresh water don't mix. The reason? Because it says that in the Quran. Now, alas, I lacked the presence of mind to turn to the teacher sitting next to me and say, will you please, at the very next science lesson, get some salt water, get some fresh water, and mix them and see what happens?
Well...
And my guess is that even if she did that, and sure enough they would mix, they still would believe the Quran, because the Quran takes precedence over fact, evidence.
Whether water is salt or fresh, shit floats. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Please stay around for overtime. Richard Dawkins, everybody, and now we will meet our panel.
I'd like to question your religion, because it seems to me that you make science a religion in itself.
In what way?
Well, it seems like there's kind of a Richard Dawkins cult, Richard Dawkinism, like science, really, nothing is certain in science. It works in statistics. You can't prove anything to 100%. So how can you say that science is better than religion, then what you're trying to do is still harm people that bring order to the world?
You can't prove anything to 100%, but 100% is a hell of a lot better than 0%, which is what you can prove by religious reasoning.
I guess you're giving up.
I mean, I think it... Let me try again on that. The idea that science is a religion, when in fact science is interested in evidence and is prepared to change its mind if contrary evidence comes in, that's very, very different from a religion. As Lawrence said earlier, in science we're constantly open to the possibility of having to change our minds, and science proceeds by progressive refinement and changing minds. And there are things that I suppose will never be disproved, things like that the planets orbit the sun. That's never going to change. I don't think that the fact of evolution is ever going to be disproved. It's always going to be true that we are cousins of chimpanzees and of monkeys and of kangaroos. So there are certain things that we definitely know to be true. The evidence is so overwhelming that in Stephen Gould's words, to object would be perverse. But so-called religious truths have absolutely no evidence going for them whatsoever.
Was that if I challenged you as Richard Dawkins, you'd probably have a problem with that. Doesn't matter who I am.
No.
No, we're listening to you now.
Like,
You're challenging me now, and I'm accepting the challenge.
Fair enough. Look, I'm a Catholic. I don't agree with what George Chappelle thinks, but I don't think he's a pedophile either. Like...
No, I don't suppose he is.
Well, just,
I don't know. I've never asked him.
My point is that you, as an eminent scientist, if I challenge your scientific doctrine, maybe your theories or opinion, you'll disagree with me.
Well, I will. I mean, when you say disagree, I will say, where is your evidence? Here's my counter-evidence.
And I'll ask for yours.
Let's sit down together and look at the evidence. I mean, that's very different from saying that I'm arguing from authority.
In fact, let me jump in. Authority, that's the key point. Richard is not an authority. I'm not an authority. There are no scientific authorities. That's a key point. There are scientific experts. Richard knows a lot about zoology. I know a lot about physics. But there's no one whose views are not subject to question. And that's the key point. And there's no student that should ever be afraid of saying to a professor in a science class, you're wrong and here's why.
Except in Germany.
Except anyway, maybe I think we... I think
why are you upset when I'm questioning you now? Like, isn't that the same thing? Isn't it like you're one of my professors?
Well,
no, what...
I think we're trying to have a discussion, but maybe I think the point is that maybe we should move on.
I mean, well, you say you're a Roman Catholic, and
I also study physics.
Yes, but I mean, do you think the wafer turns into the body of Jesus?
No.
Good. I'm delighted
Then
to
you're
hear
not
it.
really Roman Catholic. And the other thing that's important about science, and we had this discussion last night in the Muslim forum.
I might give an example. People didn't really buy the whole relativity thing when Albert Einstein first came up with it. There were people, it was when those former scientists started dying, that was when people started accepting relativity.
But the difference is, that there's a fundamental difference, and you should really appreciate this, and I'm surprised in some sense that you don't yet, but I hope you will.
Well, tell
is
me.
that, listen to me for a second, is that there's a difference between a story and something that makes predictions. And the only thing that really makes science really interesting is it works. And so last night, when I was debating with this Muslim, I challenged him when he said it's rational. I said, you're choking. I have two choices. I do the Heimlich maneuver or I pray for you. Which do you want me to do? And I think the real point of science is that it works. And if it didn't work, none of us would give a damn about it. Really.
Yeah, but the point is it works until someone comes up with a better theory. Right?
What was that? No, it works. A car works, an airplane works, the lights in this room work,
Well, classical
my computer works.
Until someone came up with a better theory.
Yeah.
So?
That's what happens.
That's what makes... Anyway, I don't... Okay.
Yeah,
I think we should move on.
A common claim made by religious people is that you cannot disprove the existence of God. Do you think science will ever advance to a point where it can disprove the existence of God? And if so, would religious people become atheists, or would they find something else to believe in?
Actually, some religious people have been asked that. I mean, specifically with respect to Christianity. There have been Christians who have been asked, what if archaeological evidence showed conclusively that Jesus never existed? And many of them said, no, I would go on believing in him, which is hard to credit. But
Hello. This is going to be a bit of a change of subject, but I'm more interested to see what Richard himself, and maybe even Lawrence, who had a similar experience, thinks of people on the internet, and even to a lesser extent in real life, misquoting or taking what you say at face value, almost raising what you say or who you are to a godlike status. I'm sure there are people here who have browsed websites such as Reddit, seen things on Facebook, 4chan, of people who just kind of use you or people such as Carl Sagan, as Neil deGrasse Tyson, people who say important things and who are smart, obviously, but they just take what they say at face value. How do you feel about that being used in like an atheistic argument? People kind of almost reversing the tables. They're almost treating you guys on like a godlike status as kind of I don't know, how would you feel about that? Or have you even observed that in the first place?
I don't think I have observed it, but if I did, I would be very disturbed. I would be very upset if anybody treated me the way Roman Catholics are taught to treat the Pope. Which, I mean, I think it's a truly horrible idea. That
You always make me kiss your ring every time I meet you. What is that?
I think it's a truly horrible idea that anybody should believe something simply because person X believes it and tells them that's what they've got to believe. It's one of the most disagreeable parts of the Roman Catholic Church that it constantly argues from authority and passes the word down, especially when the word is frankly made up in the first place.
I would like to ask you, Professor, what do you have to say to someone who has met the risen and living Lord Jesus Christ, who has walked with God for over 50 years, who received the anointing of the Holy Spirit with the same consequences as the early apostles in the book of Acts? Sir, what do you have to say? Because I assure you, for my life, it has been no delusion.
If you had been born in India, I dare say you would be saying the same thing about Lord Krishna and Lord Shiva. If you had been born in Afghanistan, I dare say you would be saying the same thing about Allah. If you had been born in Viking Norway, you would be saying the same thing about Wotan. If you had been born in Olympian Greece, you'd be saying the same thing about Zeus and Apollo. The human mind is extremely susceptible to hallucination.
Will you come back on that,
Sir, I'm being allowed by the friend I used to work with to come back. I cannot afford to build my life on hallucination, but on Jesus Christ, who is the rock. And it is that I have asked you to address, please.
You are obviously sincere, but obviously I do not share your beliefs, and I think you are hallucinating. That's all I can say. I don't doubt your sincerity.
I can have one last comment on Richard Dawkins. It'll be quick. I was in the back row as you spoke, and so I could see sort of the whole room as the words came out of your mouth, as beautifully as they always do, and as articulately as they always do. And let me just say, your commentary had a sharpness of teeth that I had not even projected for you. It's more. It was my first time meeting him, and so I felt you more than I heard you, and I asked the question. And it gets back a little to what Francisco was getting at. You're a professor of the public understanding of science, not professor of delivering truth to the public. And these are two different exercises. One of them is you put the truth out there, and like you said, they either buy your book or they don't. Well, that's not being an educator. That's just putting it out there. Being an educator is not only getting the truth right, but there's got to be an act of persuasion in there as well. Persuasion isn't always, here's the facts, you're either an idiot or you're not. It's here are the facts, and here is a sensitivity to your state of mind, and it's the facts plus the sensitivity, when convolved together, creates impact.